I'm reading from Dorthe Nors' A Line in the World, and this particular essay is called Wandering Houses. It takes a certain build to stay standing on this line. You've got to bend, walk sideways. The old houses have buckled at the knees, but still hold firm. They're digging in to shelter behind the dunes. They shiver on windswept plains behind gust-warped trees. They have hipped roofs and little windows. Everything is about making themselves small against the pressure of the wind. It produces beautiful houses in concord with the surroundings and themselves. Despite these precautions, many buildings have ended up being blown away, swept over with sand, or taken by the sea. The people who developed the historical building practices along this line knew they weren't living on a western coast. They were living on an eastern one, the eastern coast of the North Sea. If you think of the sea as a delineated geographic shape, then from above the North Sea looks a bit like France. It tapers towards the English Channel. It presses up against Scotland, runs around Norway where the country is heaviest, and down along this eastern coast. The North Sea is a nation without a capital, but with its own powerful identity. At the transition between sea and earth, its vast energy has nowhere to go and surges deep into the land. A piece of the slopes, the dunes, dashes into the sea. Then the fjords break through. Then the sea builds tongues, and by the time winter is over, the dust-green dunes are as white as alpine peaks with sand. Senknol, my grandmother called the phenomenon. Sand drifts. She grew up in the early 20th century in the inland dunes of West Jutland. Sand drifts could eat a farm, a church, a small community, for the wind sweeps in almost every day. It paints the land with sand and salt, insisting that accommodations be made, and there are fierce forces at play. Eager for a closer look, I drove north towards Vendsyssel. I wanted to visit Berglum Abbey and the scenery around it. It was late June, and the abbey perched on a crest was a safe distance inland. It was the dead calm of summer, and I walked up to the old mill on Miller's Hill to view the landscape and the abbey from a distance. As I stood there, I could, with a little wishful thinking, sense the place where a tiny church had once existed to the north. It had been pulled down before the sea could take it. Now only the bones of the dead occasionally come rattling down the Ice Age slope. I once bumped into a pale tourist by the sea where I live. She was holding a jawbone in her hand. "What do you do with this sort of thing?" she asked, holding out the jaw to me. I'd been living by the sea for 4 months. The locals thought of me as a stranger. Strangers thought of me as a local. I told the tourist that she should call the police. You can't go around picking up body parts without reporting it to someone. "But is it a dead fisherman?" asked the tourist. And I said it could also be a sailor from the Battle of Jutland, which had claimed well over 8,000 lives. "And they don't all stay out there, of course," I added. "But it could also be from a dead man's mountain." The tourist was holding the jaw with 2 fingers. "I mean, from a mass grave of people who drowned." "There are mass graves here?" asked the tourist. "There are mass graves up and down the whole coast," I said, "and the sea eats away at them." At that, the tourist handed me the jaw, as though it were my responsibility. "Call the police," I said, and handed it right back. From the site up north, where the Morup church had stood for centuries, and when now only half the churchyard remains, the dead also sift down into the sea at regular intervals and frighten tourists. Sometimes remnants of bone are left devoutly placed on top of the gravestones, some considerate person disposing of the evidence. You can end up with too many calls to the police when a churchyard is drifting into the sea.